Day 2 for real. Earlier I was having a talk with my friends about the kinds of perceptions that people have about sustainability and a lot of the, not mental issues, that's what my brain wants to say, but that's not at all what it is. All of the mental concerns and sort of internal freaking out and spazzing that goes on about sustainability is really prevalent at this point, especially in sort of young teenagers who are being told, you're gonna inherit this world, you're gonna have to deal with it, and by the way, Armageddon's on its way, so have fun with that. Just giving myself a moment to collect my thoughts and figure out what I'm going to be talking about next. When I was younger, there was always this talk going on about how what humans are currently doing is somehow unnatural, because there's the natural world and then there's what humans are doing, and they're just completely separate. And one of the first things that really started to bother me when I was younger is the idea that there is something inherently unnatural and thus inherently broken in the way that humans are working. And I do think that there are problems going on. My current major is in environmental design, and I'm really looking at ways to fix some of the stuff that's going wrong, but I think that labeling it as unnatural really doesn't quite fit the bill of what's going on. What humans are doing is extremely natural. What humans are doing is shifting the world so that it favors humans. I mean, we're not doing it fantastically, because a lot of the stuff that we're doing is screwing up the world for ourselves more than screwing up the world is totally not the message that I want to put out here. What we're doing is not actually beneficial to us in the long run, but it is beneficial to us in the short run. And in terms of natural things to do, stuff that is beneficial to a species in the short run is kind of at the base of useful stuff to be able to do. And so I think that there's an issue that arises when you make this sort of inherent break between humans and other things and call it natural. I always got the impression that what we were doing was inherently destructive, no matter what. But as I got older and looked at it more, what came through was the fact that what's really going on is that the development that we're doing is not inherently destructive in and of itself. Things change all the time. The world started off with all of the stuff that we are using in it, and thus it has the ability to adapt to all of the strange and creative and weird things that we might eventually do with it. The issue that we're really running into is the fact that we're doing it so fast. The world doesn't have time to adapt. This sounds way better in my head for some reason. I have all sorts of other stuff in place that makes it make sense and sound a bit less lame, but it's not quite coming out. I think that one of the things that's really important to focus on is the fact that this is really about time and not about some kind of inherent evilness in human beings or some inherent destructive force that drives them. When I would have been in high school, I ended up going to a community college instead, and the first class that I took there was an environmental science class, and that was really, really cool. But it sort of started off this trend for the future wherein sustainability really took over my mind, and it was one of the few things that I thought about, and it made the entire world look completely bleak and hopeless, because the only thing that you were ever fed was that we were completely screwing up the planet and there's nothing that can be done about it. We're constantly getting closer and closer and closer to peak oil. We're constantly getting closer and closer to the point that we'll hit the carbon levels where it will be too far to turn back. And what will we do then? And I've slowly been able to get over the crippling panic that tries to instill in you. And especially in the lessons that I've learned this year, one of the things that's really been driven home to me is that we have a lot of fear about the urban environment and the fact that no plants will ever grow there and it will become a barren wasteland and nothing will ever be okay there again because we've torn scars into the earth and everything is terrible now. You get the constant feeling that there's nothing that will come in to fill this place. One of the biggest debates that's going on in sort of the environmental designs sort of profession is native plants versus invasive plants. One of the things that you really learn looking at the history of invasive plants and looking at all the legislation around them and just the way they work is that, honestly, worst case scenario, these badass plants are ready and willing to come in and take over. I think what I'm trying to communicate is that the worst case scenario is not that the world is completely stripped of all life forever. The worst case scenario is that there's some really turbulent time. There's a while where all sorts of systems just get thrown for a loop, but something will adapt and come into its place. You're constantly bombarded by all these ideas of all the things that you're going to personally kill by your carbon footprint, all of the everything that you're just going to personally destroy. And really, the Earth probably going to be okay. I mean, nuclear holocaust, sort of iffy, but short of that, there's really nothing that's going to completely and totally devastate the Earth as a planet. The most likely outcome of what we're doing is to screw up our population, or to make the Earth uninhabitable for species like us, or the current species that we live in, but something will always come in to fill the niche that's created when something else goes away. And furthermore, every time there's an issue, people have a tendency to play it up as if it's the end of the world. People really like the end of the world. The end of the world is fun. It has tornadoes and hurricanes and like fire and angels maybe coming down with laser beams. That is awesome. But it's not quite as common as we think it is. For example, I'd highly recommend watching the TED Talk by somebody whose name I cannot remember. Believe it was from the one, If You Want to Help People, Shut Up and Listen. I'll have a link in the thingamahab if I ever post this. And what he talks about is that, and he'll tell the story way better than I can. So if you want to hear the story, like go check out that video and then come back here and watch me try to retell it even worse. But there was a point in time when people were looking at all of the horses and all of the horse waste going around in New York, and they were looking at this, and they were looking at, population growth, and they called in, all sorts of experts to try and figure out what the future of Manhattan looked like. And they came together and they looked at all the variables that existed at that time, and they concluded that in, I think it was 10, 20, arbitrary amount of time, Manhattan would just not exist. Because this was just not sustainable. Because there is no way this city can deal with the sheer amount of horse feces that is going to be caused by that number of people all living in Manhattan. And to quote the man who gives the talk, who you should really listen to, they saw a dirty technology that was going to literally choke the life out of Manhattan. And shortly after, people adapted. Stuff changed. New variables came into the picture that people could not take into account at that time. Humans are very, very limited in their ability to predict what's going to happen in the future. I mean, in some places I've heard people talking about how time is the fourth dimension, and if you assume that time is the fourth dimension, then in order to see forward in time, what you're going to have to do is be able to think and see in 4 dimensions, which humans just really, really aren't constructed to do. There are all sorts of ways you can try and play with it, but it's just not what we're made for. The world is not as doomed as it sounds. I'm not doing a very good of explaining why, but I'll hopefully get better at that in the future, and I will see you later.